Morning everyone, and welcome to the local review body of the 8th of December. This is a virtual meeting, and my name is Councillor Henry Anderson, and I'm the convener of the local review body. Also with me today is Councillor Ian James and Councillor Willie Wilson. We have Mr. Harrison present with us as well. He's a planning advisor to the LRB, who is not part of the planning department and has no previous involvement in any of the applications we have before us today. Our legal advisor for today is Mr. Jeff Fogg, and we also have Mr. Williams from Committee Services with us. Before we commence the business of the day, can I inform you that today's meeting will be recorded and will be on the Council's website. All participants will ensure that other devices are switched off or in silent mode. Firstly, can I ask the other members, is there any declarations of interests on today's agenda?
No declarations from me.
Not me, thanks, convener.
Thank you very much. Can we note the minute of the last meeting?
Noted.
Noted.
And now we can proceed to the business of the day. And the first item on the agenda is the erection of storage shed and associated works, King George V's playing field, Perth Kinross. Mr. Harrison, will you introduce this application for review? You're muted, Mr. Harrison.
Thank you. Thank you, convener. As you say, it's a detailed planning application for a hard-standing store, dugouts and alteration to fencing at King George V playing fields, Kinross. The site concerns a strip of ground between the all-weather hockey pitch and the rear gardens of the adjoining houses. This strip of ground is flat and an area some 10 metres wide by 60 metres long, and it would provided with an impermeable hard surface containing 2 dugout canopies. It is currently grassed and contains 3 semi-mature trees. Access to the strip would be controlled by fencing and a gate. The adjoining gardens are enclosed by a high stone wall. In addition, the existing fencing enclosing the western side of the pitch would be lowered from 3.6 metres to 1 metre in height to improve visibility for spectators. A separate small metal storage shed is also part of the proposal. I'll maybe take you through the photographs now, but you might like to have pages 26 onwards, which provide you with a location plan, the site plan and details of the fencing and the storage unit. The general sequence of the photographs, as you will see in the first photograph here, is the clubhouse. Then we'll take a circuit of the hockey playing field, and then we'll look at the area between the hockey field and the adjoining houses. So as I say, this first photograph is looking in a northerly direction, and it's looking at the pavilion or clubhouse, as it were, and of course some ancillary buildings and in this case container unit. So I'm looking at that from the car parking area to the south of the application site. So if we swing round to the right in the next photograph, we're just catching the corner of the pavilion, but we're of course seeing the all-weather hockey pitch or playing field there and the associated lighting and fencing. This is us still looking in that northerly direction. Again, from a similar position, swinging round to the right of that photograph, we now look back towards the application site, which is generally indicated by the red line there. And you're just beginning to pick up the housing beyond that, but at the same time, the corner of the pavilion as we look across that end of the hockey pitch. Moving on to the next photograph, again towards the right, we've stepped back a little bit and now come round, so we're looking across the hockey pitch back to the application site and the housing beyond, and you can see the pavilion on the left hand side of the photograph there. So as I say, we're gradually going round the hockey pitch, as it were, in that sort of south to north direction. So if we swing slightly to the right of that photograph, we now look up, as it were, the whole length of the hockey pitch and the associated fencing and lighting. And we're just catching the corner of the application site in red there still. And so you can see some of the trees beyond the application site, and as I say, beyond the hockey pitch as well there. So this is us looking at effectively at the space basically between the hockey pitch and the adjoining rugby pitch, which is referred to in the papers. So from there, if we move up towards the fencing, as it were, in the next photograph, that shows us the fencing on that side, that eastern side of the hockey pitch itself. And you can see the position of the lighting, the flood lighting there as well. And as you can see, there's a sort of a path going round that side of the, or at least a hard surface around that side of the fencing as well. From there, we move up, as it were, in the next photograph, and we're looking now, but from as effectively from the other end of the hockey pitch, where the pavilion is, which you can see more or less on the left-hand side of the photograph there. So that's looking from as effectively from within the hockey pitch to the application site, which we'll see in more detail later on. But I say that's looking in that direction. And if we move on to the next photograph, we now are at the northern end of the hockey pitch. You can see the fencing there and the separation between that end of the hockey pitch and the adjoining more modern housing, as opposed to the more Victorian housing we'll see in the later photographs adjacent to the application site. So as you can see, there's an access track down that northern end of the hockey pitch, which leads into the playing fields beyond. I mentioned that because, of course, there is reference to the question of pedestrian access into the playing fields. That access would not be affected by the proposal. So from that position, as we swing round to the right in the next photograph, we're basically at the position where there's an intention to install a fence and a gate at that northern end of the buffer strip, if I can call it that, between the residential area and the hockey pitch. So if we swing round a little to the right of that photograph again and step into that strip, that buffer strip between the two, we're standing in the area which is not affected by a proposal. As you can see, there's a row of trees here, and the ones in the immediate foreground, the two trees in the immediate foreground, are not affected by the proposal. But this is us looking in a southerly direction, and you can see the stone wall area and the hockey pitch, and this gives you an impression of that degree of separation, as it were, between the two. And as you can see, there's flood lighting on this side of the hockey pitch as well as the far side of the hockey pitch. So from that position, as we move down the strip, as it were, towards the application site, this is as it were on the edge of the application site, to show you the two trees, I think effectively the lime trees at this end of the application site, which would be removed as part of the proposal. And you can see again the relationship between the application site, the stone wall, and the housing and various outbuildings beyond. And as you'll notice there is also a second fence on that boundary in addition to the wall. So if we move on from that, in the next photograph again, a little bit further down, we, as it were, turn round and we're looking back towards from where we've come. This is basically the main body of the application site. You'll notice the trees within, which we saw in the earlier photograph. The two trees at the far end are the two lime trees which would be removed, and we're just picking up the round tree you can see just on the left-hand side of the photograph, making its presence felt there. So I say this is the main body of the application site. So we can see the fence on the right-hand side, which is going to be lowered from that height down to 1 metre in height. And then the area of grass you see here would become the hard standing and accommodating the dugouts. You'll note in this photograph as it were, the green strip halfway down the wall, which is the access from the private garden into that area, which is referred to by one of the people who made representations. And again, you can see the housing and ancillary buildings on the far side of the wall. And if we step back from that photograph in the next photograph, again, we're seeing the whole site, but this is effectively the entry into the application site. And you can see that the tree nearest to us is the round tree we saw in the earlier photograph. So if we move on to the next photograph, that just leaves you with the general impression of the application site and the adjoining ground. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, the proposal seeks to improve the facilities for participants, coaches and spectators who already use this area. In that context, it is seen as supported by Local Development Plan Policies 1A, 1B, placemaking and Policy 17 residential areas by, firstly, using the land efficiently, secondly, adapting the space to a future use, thirdly, meeting a recreational need, notably in providing a warm-up area of the all-weather pitch to assist the transition between games, a facility for storing kit off the pitch, shelter for coaches, and a lower fence to improve visibility for spectators. Fourthly, improving a community facility. Fifthly, making a positive contribution to the quality of the environment and the amenity of the place, notably by siting the facilities adjacent to a high screen wall where it has least impact on the adjoining houses. And sixthly, incorporating new landscaping proposals. Regarding Local Development Plan Policy 40A, Forest and Woodland Strategy, the 3 trees that would be removed are not of cultural or historic value and do not provide roosting sites. These can be compensated for by planting elsewhere within the grounds. Regarding public access, there is no requirement for this to be maintained in relation to playing fields under the land reform legislation. The proposal does not prejudice the overall level of public access into the playing fields. In addition, there is insufficient space for this facility to be provided between the eastern side of the hockey pitch and the adjoining rugby pitch. This provision has the support of the custodians of the land and would be less expensive to maintain than the present grass. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling, the site is allocated for open space retention and provision under Local Development Plan Policy 14, and in principle, the proposal complies with that policy. The proposed shed is seen as acceptable. The facility would be located immediately adjacent to the adjoining houses. Local Development Plan Policy PM1 and 17 seek to protect residential amenity. This strip of land is seen as a buffer between the playing fields and the houses. The loss of the landscape strip, and in particular the 2 lime trees and the round tree, is viewed as detrimental to the character of the locality and the amenity of the occupants of the houses. The trees, which range between 7 to 10 metres in height and are in good health, are part of a linear group which provide interest and screening during each of the seasons, as well as a degree of visual amenity and privacy between the playing fields and the houses. The suggested replacement planting elsewhere would not fulfil the same function. The proposal is not seen as creating a significant change to the noise levels experienced by householders. The path that runs along the western side of the pitch is not a right-of-way or part of the core path network, and while this would be closed, access to the wider playing fields would remain open. Turning to representations, there have been a total of 17 representations, 13 are objections, 3 are in support, and 1 is neutral. These mainly concern the prospective impacts on residential amenity and, in contrast, the benefits of those using the facility. And these are summarised on pages 41 and 42. Many of the objections contain extensive analysis and details. Kinross Civic Trust are also committed, have also submitted a detailed objection, including an assessment of the option of having this facility on the opposite side of the pitch, and that's on page 77 onwards. In this case, there is neither a request for a site visit nor a request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Mr. Harrison. Members, have we any questions for officers on this application? Sir Wilson.
Great, thanks, Convener. Yes, just looking at the picture there of the buffer zone. You mentioned in your remarks just towards the end that the Civic Trust, I think, in Kinross Shire have made a suggestion about an alternative location. Mr. Harrison, you've been on site. Where in relation to the picture we see would be that alternative location?
Effectively,
can you show it in the photographs?
Yes, it would be on, as it were, on the opposite side of the pitch altogether. It's not illustrated by this photograph. We'd have to. You may remember the earlier photographs when we went round the pavilion to the opposite side. Yes, in that sort of, yes, either of that or the photograph before that shows the general area on the opposite side, where there is some space between the rugby pitch and the actual all-weather playing surface, which obviously is fixed.
Yes, indeed. And the issue is to have a comment. I can understand the request for accommodation quite readily, and the muddy feet issue, but that would allow people to. I realise this isn't part of the application, Convener, but it was referred to in correspondence, and that would allow circulation for players. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm fine with that.
Councillor James, do you have any questions?
I think what we've been given, Convener, in our paperwork and submissions, I'm quite happy. I don't think there's any further questions that I have at the moment. Thank you.
Is there any information on is the King George V Park a trusteeship that covers the whole of the area that's involved? You know, if one was wanting to do anything, they would have to get permission from that trusteeship. Would that be correct?
I think there is some reference to by the applicant that he has, if you like, consent from what used to be called the Playing Fields Association. It's got a new name now, I think.
Yeah.
Exactly.
34.
Thank you very much. I was just looking up here. So that particular aspect, in that sense, appears to be addressed. Whether there are any other consents, either from even the suggestion is the local authority has some involvement here. I think these are largely separate, effectively civil, or you might say quasi-civil matters that would have to be cleared. That I would suggest to you that they're not really that germane to your determination of the application.
No, I just was looking to see if this was the only alternative. That was why I was asking the question.
Ah, yes.
The Parks Committee had said yes, that area and that area only. That's where I was coming from. And obviously, is there any history about when the decision was made to create that all-weather hockey pitch, that there should be a buffer strip between that and the housing and gardens?
It's not something that I have information on, and I'm taking shall we say, a bit of a guess that the trees you see in the photograph here were probably planted in association with those works. Certainly that's been suggested elsewhere. The trees themselves, well, again, I don't know what size they were when they were put in, or whether they were standards or heavy standards or whatever, but it's obviously some time ago, maybe 15, so 20, possibly even 25 years ago, depending on the size of the trees. But I say, I'm just trying to, shall we say, take an educated guess at what we're looking at.
Thank you. If that's all the questions, then members, can we proceed to determine the application for review based on the information we have before us? That is information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor. Councillor Wilson, are you happy to go?
I'm content with enough information before us to make a decision.
Councillor James, are you content?
Likewise, convener, I think there's enough information. Thank you.
And I'm also content. So I'll let Councillor James, would you like to lead the debate?
Yes, thanks, convener. I mean, it is an emotive subject. It's a sports field, and there's been talk or in the objections, it's been referenced to a buffer zone. The buffer zone, if you like, is still part of the sports field and is still used by people. So I'm not convinced that it is a buffer zone of sorts. I think the only issue here for me would have been the removal of the trees. But I think for me, the benefits outweigh the losses. I think the decrease in the height of the fence, I don't think is detrimental, because there is, as you can see in the picture we've got on the screen in front of us, still a high fence which protects the property directly behind that sports pitch. I mean, Scotland has beautiful open space. We do have some beautiful sports pitches. Unfortunately, we also have the rain, and I think an all-weather surface, especially for this one here, I believe the benefits far outweigh the losses. I don't think it will be detrimental to the residential amenity, and for my part, convener, I'm quite happy to go against the officer's recommendation for refusal. I would actually allow it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James. I'll take that on board. And Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, convener. Well, I've given very careful consideration to quite a high volume of paperwork that we've had before us. The presentation today, and read very carefully the representations both for and against the application. For review, I take a different view from Councillor James on this one. I think, and it's useful we've got that picture there of the amenity strip, the buffer strip before us, because I think a number of things. I think putting the buildings, hard standing and other facilities there is in the wrong place. We don't have an alternative application before us, but we have some evidence that there is an alternative location or locations within the control of the applicant that could at least be examined. I also have a fear, convener, that if we grant this and the trees are removed, then there may be further application, although this is speculative, but for further development, and that buffer strip would become completely eroded as a buffer strip. I think it's important. It's been designed, very well designed, in my opinion, in planning terms, as a decent space with trees between the domestic properties that we've heard have been there for many years, and what I think is a very essential public facility. And I think the buffer strip is a good balance between the residential amenity and the need to provide good sports facilities for Kinross and a wider area. So I would go with the report. I've got a number of minor textual comments on the reasons for refusal, but we'll leave these till later, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Yes, I've looked at this very carefully, and I have sympathy with an organisation that's looking to improve their facilities, and it is very commendable that the committees for these organisations go out and do things. But sadly, I think that this erosion of the buffer strip is not acceptable to myself when I can see, and that's why I asked about the park as a whole, but I can see that, and you can see it by the pictures, that we can, there can be alternatives, and as I say, within the objections, this was put on the table as well, which is good to hear objectors actually making constructive comments and how they perceive it going forward. So with that comment, I would uphold the decision by the council officers, planning team. It would be detrimental to the character of the area, it would impact on residential amenity, and it would impact on visual amenity. So therefore I would go for upholding the decision to refuse. Thank you. Mr. Fogg, do you wish to get some clarity on that? I think you're muted again.
No, Kabir, I think the three of you have expressed yourselves clearly, and there's no further clarification in terms of your respective positions. Councillor Wilson did take reference to some minor points in relation to the appointed officer's decision notice, and it might be useful to allow him to come in at this point before I comment further.
Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Mr. Fogg. I'm on page 37, colleagues. I think the first reason for refusal in line 2, where it says the development would remove an existing buffer, I think diminish would be a more appropriate, because there's some of the trees would be left. So diminish rather than remove. And just one word change, Convener. And in reason number 2, the contrary to policy 1 placemaking, I think we need to specify the parts of that policy, and that would be A, policy 1 placemaking A, and B, part G. And that's under para 2, and then in paragraph 3, line 3, where it says the management of trees and amenity value rather than of. That's just a typo, I think, in that, but that would mean the protection of management of groups of trees and amenity value. If Convener, you're agreeable to accept these, they're quite important terms and things of the legalities of things, but they don't really alter basically the meaning of the reasons for refusal, but they do provide a wee bit of detail on them.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Yes, it's as I say, it's yes. That so the decision has been made that we have rejected the applicant's appeal, and we will now move on to the next item, which is the erection and replacement dwelling house land 150 metres southwest of Glencroft, Abernethy. Mr. Harrison, will you lead on this one? Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. As you say, it's a detailed planning application for the erection of a replacement dwelling house on land 150 metres southwest of Croftfoot, Glencroft, Abernethy. The application site comprises a roughly triangular area, including a combination of open land and scrub, and 2 small groups of mature conifers. It is enclosed on 2 sides by public roads, and an open field on the third. A detached house, Glencroft, lies to the north. The shell of a small brick building lies at the southwestern end and the most elevated part of the land. The proposed house would be sited at an opposing corner of the landholding where the two public roads converge. And I'll just take you to the photographs now, but you might like to pages 159 onwards, providing you with a location plan and site plans, and of course drawings of the proposed house as a detailed application. General sequence of the photographs, as you see in this first photograph here, is views towards the existing building, then the landholding from Drumcraig Road, then the site from the Aberfeldy to Strathmiglo Road. So here we are, say, on the road to Drumcairn, looking in an easterly, generally easterly direction, and the building, which we'll see in more detail, is positioned at the side of the road, as I say, as we move down towards it here. But that gives you, shall we say, there's some general context there. And if we move to the next photograph further down the road, we see the building itself, or this is the frontage of the building. As you can see, it's a brick-built structure with a number of windows in it. And if we move to the next photograph, we move from the frontage to look at the west elevation. And then if we move to the next photograph, we're still at that western corner, but we see the rear elevation of the building and to some extent the condition of the roof, which has basically been a sheeting form of roof on top of the structure, and most of it is no longer there. If we move to the next photograph, we move from the rear elevation to the opposite elevation, as it were, on the eastern side. You note there really aren't much in the way of window openings on that particular elevation, but we do have the remains of the chimney stack from the fireplace in the interior. Moving on from that photograph, we move into that interior. You might just be able to make out the fireplace beyond there, and then an entry into the WC on the right-hand side of the photograph there. And as you can see, it's a bare brick building on the inside as well as the exterior. We now move out of that building and we move across the road, as it were, to get the whole of the frontage there. And the reason for the yellow arrow, as it were, is hopefully to make it clear there appear to almost be two halves to the building. In other words, the left-hand side seems to have been built at a different time to the right-hand side. One is added to the other, probably the left-hand side first and then the right-hand side as an addition. From there, we move on and swing round, still looking down Drumcairn Road. And this is the mature group of Scots Pine and Sitka spruce, the main group within the holding itself. And we're basically going to go down the road to the application position of the proposed house now. So if we move a little further down the road in the next photograph, this is us getting down towards the bottom part of the site. As you can see, there's the scrub within the application site on the right-hand side. And we move to the next photograph. This is, as it were, on the corner, and we're now picking up the general position of the proposed house, and Glencroft is, and you'll see later, is on the left-hand side of the photograph in amongst that group of trees that are highlighted in the sun there. So if we move again further down the road, this takes us onto the other road which fronts the proposed house site. This is the Aberfeldy to Strathmiglo Road. We're looking now in the northerly direction, in other words towards Abernethy at the moment. And then we've got the sequence of photographs swinging to the left now. So if we move to the next photograph, we're still on the road, but we're looking into the entry of Glencroft itself and just picking up the edge of the application site on the left-hand side as well. So this is basically the junction between Drumcairn Road, as you come down the hill we've been up before, and where it meets the Strathmiglo Road. And from there, if we move in to the next photograph, we see Glencroft itself, just to give you an indication of the nature of that building, single-storey bungalow style, as it were. And then swinging round to the left in that next photograph, we catch the corner of the application site, as it were. And then swinging round again to the left in the next photograph, you can see we're getting the position of the proposed house. And behind that, you can see the group of Scots pine and Sitka spruce we saw a little earlier. We swing round again to the left of that photograph. So we're now gone all the way around looking in a southerly direction now. You can see the extent of the application site and the public road, as it were, going beyond. So if we go up the public road a little bit to the next photograph, looking back towards where the house site is, you maybe just can pick up part of the roof of Glencroft beyond. And then another sequence of photographs swinging to the left just to give you a feel for the application site. There's the main position of the house, and of course again catching the conifers behind. And if we swing round to the left of that photograph again, we're now looking up the long boundary, as it were, in relation to the adjoining field, to basically the position of the original building we saw. And so that the conifer you see there is identified, as it were, is adjacent to the building. So from there, if we move to the next photograph, we're looking up that boundary again to the position of the original building, if I can call it that. And as you can see, it's an open field beyond on that particular southern boundary. Now swinging round this time to the right of that, just to give you a feel, we have that southern boundary again. And swinging round again further to the right of that, we get the main group of conifers. And swinging round again to the right of that, we're looking across part of the conifers on the application site for the house. And again round to the right of that, we look down, as it were, the length of that lower area, which is adjacent to the main public road. And you can see the position of the house site in that photograph again. And just for completeness, we swing round to the right of that photograph, we see the public road and the house position. There's a slight difference in levels there, as you can see. And then again, round to the right of that photograph, we look right across the public road to the rising ground beyond. So from there, if we step back again, we get the frontage of the house site. If we swing around to the right of that, we see the entry into that and the general position in relation to the house site. And you can see the far corner, the position of the original building, as it were. And in between, we have the clump of conifers. So I'll just leave you with that photograph. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, it's considered that the principle of the replacement of the existing house is accepted by the planning officers. Although the first reason refers to the proposal being contrary to Local Development Plan Policy 19, the grounds of refusal only relate to the criteria of the associated supplementary guidance. The assessment of the criteria is seen as subjective. Concern is expressed that the application has not been subject to a site visit and discussion with the agent, and in that sense, the proposal has not been given appropriate consideration. The land containing the existing building is severely constrained by its size, slope, and the presence of trees. The proposed site is set at the lowest and most level area of the applicant's land ownership and is well defined by roads and the ditch. These site-specific conditions and the presence of mature trees at the original position are seen as a justification for the relocation of the proposed position, which is viewed as having a better landscape fit. The proposed repositioning within the small holding is seen as largely inconsequential. The existing building is seen as being of no architectural merit, and the proposal envisages a property of a design in keeping with the rural location. Replacing this building with another of the same scale would be too small to provide for modern living standards. The proposed replacement house is viewed as providing modest accommodation, which makes best use of the roof space and adopts a broken T-shaped plan form. It is noted that the planning officer finds the proposed design to be acceptable. A study of the biodiversity of the site could be addressed through a planning condition. Turning now in summary to the officer's report of handling. As the site is out with any settlement boundary, this proposal falls to be assessed against the current Local Development Plan Policy 19 and the associated Housing in the Countryside Guide of 2020, notably in relation to Category 4, which allows for the renovation or replacement of houses. This proposal envisages the replacement of a ruinous house. Support for the proposal is therefore dependent on meeting 3 criteria, namely that the replacement is, firstly, of high quality of design, secondly, of a similar scale, and thirdly, sited in the same position as the existing house. Firstly, regarding design, the proposed house does not raise any concerns for the officer. Secondly, regarding scale, the former house was single-storey, has a footprint of some 30 square metres and comprises 2 small rooms and a toilet. It is recognised that it would be difficult to provide accommodation to modern requirements within such limited floor space. In such circumstances, a degree of flexibility is seen as appropriate. However, by comparison, the proposed house has 2 levels of accommodation in a 1.5-storey form, has a footprint of some 150 square metres, providing 3 bedrooms, a kitchen family room, living room, study, utility room and garage. As such, it is not assessed as reflecting the scale or form of the existing building. Thirdly, regarding siting, the criteria in the Housing in the Countryside Guide requires replacement houses to occupy a similar site, including its orientation and distance from the road, unless the site conditions suggest another position that would be a better landscape fit. While the existing house site is on raised ground and may not be large enough for a bigger house, it is seen as having a good fit in the landscape. The application site for the proposed house has taken in the whole holding rather than the curtilage of the existing ruin. The existing building is some 120 metres distant and not intervisible with or from the site of the proposed house. The proposed site is quite open and is not seen as having sufficient enclosure once scrub is cleared for the development. Consequently, the officer concludes that the proposal concerns a new house on land with a less satisfactory landscape fit rather than a replacement house. The proposed house is also orientated differently and set back from the road. Taken together, the case for an alternative siting of the house is not considered to be justified. An ecological appraisal has not been requested as the principle of the development is not supported. In conclusion, the application is not considered to comply with Local Development Plan Policy 19 or the relevant category of the Housing in the Countryside Policy and Guidance. In this case, turning to representations, there has been one representation concerning surface water runoff, private ownership and access rights, light pollution, and a reference to the use of the existing building being other than for a dwelling house. In this case, there is neither a request for a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison. And because this is recorded, just a bit of clarification. Sometimes it was been saying Aberfeldy when it's actually Abernethy.
My apologies. You're quite
right. No, it was up on the picture as well, so I don't know where it's. Anyway, let's move on. Is there any questions for officers on this application for review, Councillor? Councillor Wilson?
Thanks, Convener. Yes, a couple at least of questions. And where we've seen the arrow pointing to existing building, I noticed the word buildings used rather than the existing house. Mr. Harrison, you've had the advantage of being on site, but the photographs were extremely helpful in showing us the property that's there. The walls weren't plastered. There was a toilet, but no kitchen facility. Do we know, anecdotally or having examined the site, if this was ever used as a domestic dwelling?
Well, first of all, I think the applicant's agent refers to it being occupied. I think back in the 1960s, I think was the last reference to some occupation of the property. I've described it as a building because in other places it is described as a building rather than a house, although I notice it's referred to as a Glencroft cottage on a plan as well. The reason I've described it as a building because I thought it wasn't, shall we say, immediately obvious that it was a house in terms of the actual structure of it and the nature of it. I don't have, shall we say, a definitive view that it is a dwelling house or not a dwelling house. Clearly, the applicant has indicated that in their view, it is a dwelling house. I'm just aware that there is reference in the report of handling that the site wasn't actually visited by the officer. He has obviously assessed it as if it is a dwelling house, but it's not one of these situations where it's immediately obvious that it is a dwelling house as opposed to being used in some other context in terms of providing accommodation. So I'm sorry to be vague about it. I'd like to be absolutely clear, but there seemed to be enough, shall we say, evidence on the ground that it's obviously not been in use for a very long time because it's largely without a roof. But as you say, the interior isn't finished in a way which immediately would make you think this has been used as a permanent dwelling. That's not to say it hasn't been used in some contexts as accommodation, but as we're talking about something which the last use is in the order of half a century ago, you can probably see why a certain amount of doubt is there.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Harrison. I think the convener allows me to make one remark. Again, it's a pity that the case officer hadn't visited the site. I know the restrictions that are currently upon us. However, I think we would have been able to form a view as you did and give a careful assessment of the use of the building. But it's quite clear, convener, factually that the walls are not plastered and there is no kitchen facilities available from the photographs that we've seen. And Mr. Harrison, second question, how far away is the nearest dwelling, which is, I think, Glencroft?
Mm-hmm. I think if you turn to page 160.
Yep.
It would seem to be approximately the order of 40 metres away from the gable, from one gable to the other, something of that order. It's on the opposite side of the Drumcairn Road.
Yes, which is a substantial distance. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Harrison. Thank you, convener.
Councillor James, have you any questions on this matter?
Thanks, convener. The only two questions I had, Councillor Wilson's already asked, so no more for me. Thank you.
Thank you. I am the local member in that area, and I actually, in the late 70s and 80s, I had connections with this particular area, and my understanding from the farmer at Drumcairn was that this was the quarry office, that there was an attempt to quarry, and one can see the quarry work above it. So I understand it's a quarry office, which makes sense. And just to refresh my memory, because that's quite a long time ago, I did pop in and have a look at it just to confirm, because I'd never heard of Glencroft Cottage. So I had a look at it, and it's interesting to me. And the maybe Mr. Harrison, can you confirm the distance between the existing building and the proposed house, and is there any evidence of there being a garden at the existing dwelling?
Well, the distance, which is the easy bit to respond to, is something in the order of 120 metres between the existing building and the proposed building. In terms of evidence of garden, I certainly saw nothing obvious in terms of what you might say would be the curtilage of the former house, or former the building that's existing on the site. The ground round about it, you might have picked this up from the photograph, falls away quite rapidly from the position of the actual footprint of the building. So it is very steeply sloping. The trees round about it, which, as you'll see on page 60, sort of the three trees shown diagrammatically, are quite mature. As you can see, even in the photograph, the conifer there is it's really quite substantial. There's also a fairly substantial willow tree as well, which have been there for many years. So the evidence of what you might expect for a garden ground of that size is not immediately obvious, if I can put it that way. Obviously, that's a very large conifer to have in a small space adjacent to the building. But I say you'll notice on page 60 that what appears to be the land ownership doesn't actually follow the land around the building. It just takes in the actual footprint of the building as an adjunct, as it were, to the main holding, but leaves the surrounding land in some way separate in terms of ownership. So again, it's not immediately obvious that there is a garden ground associated with the building.
Thank you. And if that's all the questions, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review based on the information that is before us, that is information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor? Councillor Wilson, are you happy to proceed?
I'm content to proceed, convener. Thank you.
And Councillor James?
Excuse me. Likewise, convener. I'm content to proceed.
And I'm content to proceed. Councillor Wilson, will you lead the debate on this one?
Thanks, convener. And again, thanks for the correspondence we've had and the report and the photographs by Mr. Harrison. Yeah, this is all of these are difficult. None of them are ever quite as straightforward as you think when you initially look at the agenda. So it's right that we deliberate at length on these. It's fairly clear to me that from what you've said yourself, convener, with your local knowledge and the photographs that we've seen, that this was not used conventionally as a family domestic residence, and I choose my words carefully. Right, it may have been used for as an office. It may have been used for accommodating people for a workplace, but I don't see there being firm evidence that this was used as a family domestic residence, or that the applicant hasn't demonstrated that. The proposed site is some 120 metres distance, as we've heard, from the current structure, and I think that the size of the proposed development is not in keeping with a potential replacement. Obviously, the replacement need to be substantially bigger than what's there. The site is a good bit away, and I don't think this really, given the scale of it and the length of distance from the current replacement, it qualifies under the existing policies. The size on page 161, colleagues, is fairly clear that this is not a cottage type development, which you would expect maybe as a proposal, but a very substantial family dwelling. And for these reasons, and the fact that the proposal is contrary to policy 19, and I can elaborate on these later, convener, a wee bit more, I would propose that we do not allow the review, and we uphold the planning officer's reasons for refusal. In fact, I would like to add to them if there's a majority in favour of doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor James.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I second everything that Councillor Wilson's just said. There's nothing in the review document sent in by the applicant that tells me anything to the contrary to what the planning officer has laid down in his reasons for refusal. I don't think there was ever a doubt of the house being a nice house and everything else, but for all the wrong reasons. Wrong place. It's not replacing a building of similar size. So I'm of the same opinion as Councillor Wilson. Thanks, convener.
Thank you, Councillor James, and I would totally agree with everything that's been said so far. As I say, it's quite clear that it's not replacing an existing building, i.e. building on the footprint. It's nothing like that. It's 120 metres away. The building, regardless if it was a house or an office, which anecdotally I was told, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is that there is no connection whatsoever with it. The ground it's being built on would probably have been a better appearance because if I remember, there was a lot of trees there, but if one looks at that picture we have, the overhead cables has meant that the trees had to be removed. So therefore that gives you this scrubby, unkept situation that you're looking at currently at the photograph. However, we have lots of areas that's scrubby and we would like to see something done with it, but that doesn't mean that it's a location for a house. It doesn't come under any of the conditions that it doesn't fall within any of the policies that we have in our local development plan that I can see. So therefore it's unanimous that we uphold the officer's decision on this one. And I believe Councillor Wilson would maybe wish to add to the reasons for refusal, if I'm correct.
If I may take a moment or two, convener, interesting when we talk about areas of untidy scrub, what might be untidy scrubland to us is a haven for birds and small mammals in terms of wild.
Totally agree, yeah, totally agree.
However, moving on, the reasons for refusal are on page 185, and there's one reason given, and I'm content with that, although it says renovation on line 3, renovation or replacement of houses. We can leave that in because this isn't, I think, replacing, in my opinion, a house. I'd like to suggest we add 3 things. One is the reason for refusal, and I'm happy that Mr. Harrison and Mr. Fogg can articulate the technical details of these, but there's an issue about fitting into the landscape. It's mentioned in the planning officer's report, but it isn't given in any of the reasons for refusal. Secondly, the distance from the building that we've got of 120 metres. If it'd been less, maybe there would have been a case to look at it and more on that, the merits of that. And thirdly, on page 161, I return to that, convener, the size of the house that's proposed, I think, given that there's an argument for replacement, that the proposal is disproportionately large, even if the the building that we've seen had been a domestic residence, and there had been evidence of that. I think this is not a cottage type development in any shape or form. This is, I said earlier on, a substantial family house. So I think that the size of the house doesn't comply with the spirit of and detail of the policies of replacement houses in the countryside. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to have that added. Mr. Fogg, are you happy with all that?
Yes, convener. I think if Councillor Wilson had indicated that he was happy for Mr. Harrison and I to finesse it perhaps afterwards, I think we've got the essence of where he's coming from.
Thank you. If that, and everything else is quite okay with you, Mr. Fogg. We'll move on to the next item. Just give me a second to bring it up. And the next item is the erection of a dwelling house in principle 90 metres east of Westmill Farmhouse in Stewart, which is actually Kinnear, but that's how it's been termed. Anyway, Mr. Harrison, over to you for the presentation on this application.
Thank you again, convener. As you say, it's planning permission in principle for the erection of a dwelling house at 90 metres east of Westmill Farmhouse, Kinneard by Instewart. The site extends to some 2,800 square metres of fairly level ground. It forms part of a much larger field to the north. A former mill lade separates the site from the remainder of the steeply sloping rising ground to the rear. A row of deciduous trees run along the southern roadside boundary. There is more recent planting on the eastern boundary, which abuts a currently undeveloped house plot. A field access track and open ground lies to the western side. The proposed site lies in a position in the countryside between the settlement of Kinneard and a row of houses known as Craig Galley. It fronts onto the public road, and access to the proposed plot would be adjacent to the existing field gate entry. You might like to have pages 253 and 254, which provide you with a site plan and an indicative position of the proposed house. Page 298 provides you with the best location plan. I'll just show the photographs now, but the sequence of the photographs is first of all the general landscape context, then Westmill and approaching the site from the west, the site itself, the adjoining consented site, and then finally the houses which comprise Craig Galley. So as we see in the first photograph here, this is us approaching, looking in a generally northerly direction across the open land of the Carse, as it were, and where it runs up against the braes and the sloping ground to the north there. As we look across the field here, on this extreme left-hand side of the photograph, you're maybe just managing to pick up Westmill Farmhouse. And then we have the red line, which shows the application site frontage. And from there, you can see how much the ground rises, the remainder of that field to the rear, and then beyond that, the woodland, and then even further rising ground. Then the blue line gives you an indication of the position of the consented site, which is also in the applicant's ownership. And then swinging, as it were, along the road towards the right, finally we have the houses which comprise Craig Galley. So if we move from that up the road a little bit and get a little bit closer, just to give you a little bit more of an indication of, I say again, the frontage of the steading building on the extreme left of the photograph here. That's Westmill Farmhouse. Then you can see the farmhouse itself as we go along the road frontage there, and you can see the two white dots, which are the dormer windows of the farmhouse. And then you see the application site and some of the row of trees which front onto the road there, and then the frontage of the approved site, and then we start to pick up some of the houses in Craigdally on the right-hand side there. And then the purpose of the photograph is really just to show you the landscape context between the open flat karst and the rising ground behind, and the woodland and fields involved there. So as we swing first of all to the right of that photograph, we see Craigdally. And then if we go back to the left of the photograph, we see the Westmill farmhouse and steading end in a little more detail. And then if we go up the road in the next photograph, this takes us to the frontage of that Westmill steading. And we can just also make out the frontage of the application site with the small red line, as it were. And then beyond that, we're picking up the properties forming Craigdally itself. So we're going to go from that position further up the road, as it were, to start off with. So in the next photograph, we're just catching the Westmill farmhouse and the dormers I mentioned, or at least one of them. And you can see the farmhouse is set well back from the road in this instance, and has an area of open, uncultivated ground in front of it as well. So if we swing round to the right of that in the next photograph, we look again partly across the uncultivated ground in the foreground, and again you can see the rising fields and woodland beyond, and just the frontage of the application site and Craigdally beyond. So if we go up the road a little bit further in the next photograph, we look across that undeveloped ground in between the public road and the farmhouse, and again swinging round in the next photograph, we catch the beginnings of the application site itself from that same position. And then if we can move to the next photograph, we get the existing field access and put on the black line identifying the settlement boundary, because you'll appreciate the position of the application site in relation to the identified settlement boundary of Kinnaird in the local development plan is an issue. This is the field access, which is referred to as the separation between that boundary and the application site, which of course is shown in red here in general terms. So if we move from that position in the next photograph into the application site, you see that relationship in more detail, and then we can move round to the next photograph, which we look across the main body of the application site, which is that lower, relatively flat area. It's a slight slope in it, as you can see, but in comparison to the rising ground behind, it's relatively gentle. So we have a slightly sloping site there. And then if in the next photograph we swing round to the right again, we look down the main body of the application site. You can see the edge of the mature deciduous trees on the right-hand side of the photograph, which is between the site and the public road. You then see a row of trees at the far end of the application site, which we'll see in more detail later. That's basically been planting, which I understand has been undertaken to help to enclose the site beyond, which is the existing consented site, which again we'll see in later photographs. But if this is us looking generally in an easterly direction, of course, and then if we go into the next photograph, that takes us to the back of the application site now. And again, we've got the black line showing the boundary with the settlement, the intervening farm access, and then the application site, and the prospective position of an access into the application site as well. Swinging now to the left in the next photographs, we look across the main body of the application site, and you can see this is as it were, the bridge over the mill lade, which forms the rear of the application site. It also forms the rear of the adjoining consented site. This photograph shows you both the site and the trees which front onto the roadway. Swinging now again to the left of that photograph, we see the lade in more detail, and of course the application site itself. And this shows the break and slope. You can see the ground steeply rising from the lower level up in towards the field. So if we swing round to the right of that, We'll again see that slope quite clearly, and the extent to which the ground rises towards the woodland beyond. And swinging round again in the next photograph towards the left, we see the field extending further up to the north, and again the woodland beyond. So from there, we step up a little bit in the next photograph, and able to, from a slightly more elevated position, just to give you a bit of a feel for that, we look back down towards the application site, and of course the lade shown as in shadow there, as it were. And beyond that, just to be clear, the consented site is beyond the application site there. So we swing round to the right in the next photograph. Again, we look back down to the main body of the site, just to give you that feel for it. From there, we move on in the next photograph. We move into the application site. And this is us now looking towards the western boundary. You may remember I mentioned before Westmill Farmhouse. You might just be able to make it out, or rather the chimney of it, in the photograph there, just beyond the trees, underneath where it says Westmill Farmhouse. And then we're looking back across not just the application site, but the intervening open ground between the farmhouse and the public road, and in the far distance, the steading buildings we saw earlier on. So if we now, as it were, effectively turn all the way around in the next photograph and look in the opposite direction, this is us now looking towards the eastern boundary and the consented site, and I say the planting which has been carried out relatively recently, which is the boundary between those two areas. From there we move on in the next photograph into the public road, still seeing the consented site and looking in the opposite direction, and we can see the frontage of the application site indicated in red as well. Swinging around to the right of that photograph, we see the consented site again, just to give you the full indication of it. Swinging round again to the turning round altogether, we're now looking at Craigdally itself and the properties which front onto the public road. So there'll now be a sequence of photographs which show the various properties as we move down in that easterly direction, first of all the way down and then all the way back again. So if we move to the next photograph, that's the cottages you saw fronting onto the road. Moving down a little bit further, in the next photograph, we have the property, in this case it seems to have been burnt out, which is set back from the public road somewhat, but it still has a frontage onto the public road. And then swinging round to the right of that, we look down the road and catch the other properties on that frontage. If we carry on up the road a little bit further, we have this group of houses at the furthest end, as it were, of Craigdally. And then if we go to the next photograph, thank you, we have, I say, really quite a clear grouping of houses at that far end. And just for completeness, if we turn round now and go to the next photograph, we look down now in the opposite direction down Craigdally. And as you can see, there are properties which front directly onto the public road. There are some properties set back from the public road, but there are also even properties that are slightly behind existing properties in the road. So if we carry on in the next photograph, thank you, we're back down towards the frontage of the cottages. If we carry on to the next photograph, it gives you an indication of the frontage of the excuse me, the consented site, and let's say that view in that shall we say westerly direction. So we carry on to the next photograph. Thank you. That just leaves you with a photograph of the site in general. Turning first of all to the applicant's case in summary, the site is seen as being framed by a combination of vegetation, rising ground and a watercourse. The size of the plot reflects those in the locality, including the approved adjoining house plot. The development is seen as replicating and strengthening the character and pattern of development in this locality. The site is also viewed as a gap between the settlement of Kinnaird and the approved house plot. The site does not have a coterminous boundary with the defined settlement of Kinnaird. Therefore, Local Development Plan Policy 6, settlement boundaries, is not seen as relevant to the assessment of the proposal. It is indicated that the proposal is not seeking to circumvent this policy by defining the site in this way to exclude the intervening field access. Regarding the definition of ribbon development, the properties forming Craigdally are not considered to form a continuous line of 5 or more houses due to the separation between plots and the presence of shared accesses and the setting back of some houses from the public road. This building group is seen as clusters of up to 2 houses rather than ribbon development. The applicant does not accept the officer's view that Craigdally takes the form of ribbon development. He does consider that the proposal falls within the definition of ribbon development, but the circumstances of the site are seen as being supporting the proposal because it complies with Category 1 building groups of Policy 19. The plot is generous enough for a house to provide for its parking needs and without resulting in any adverse impact on residential amenity of others. The officer's assessment refers to the proposal as forming an extension to a building group. This is seen as contradicting the terms of the decision notice, which states that the proposal fails to meet the requirements of a building group of 3 or more buildings. The proposal is also seen as being supported by broader objectives such as sustainable development. The officer's assessment is considered to be biased, and there has been a failure to provide guidance as to what could be acceptable. Turning now in summary to the report of handling, as the site is out with the settlement boundary of Kinnaird, this falls to be assessed against the current Local Development Plan Policy 19 and the associated Housing in the Countryside Guide. In particular, the requirements of Category 1 regarding the extension of a building group. While the application site does not physically abut the settlement boundary due to the intervening field track, assessment of the proposal against Policy 6, settlement boundaries, is also considered to be appropriate due to its immediate proximity to the boundary of Kinnaird. Regarding Category 1, building groups, the policy is clear that proposals that create or contribute to ribbon development will not be supported. While the circumstances of each configuration needs to be assessed, ribbon development is defined as a continuous line of 5 or more houses where properties front onto a public road and enjoy individual accesses. It is noted that some of the houses to the east, that's at Craigdally, are set back from the road frontage and have shared driveways. However, the officer concludes that the houses forming Craigdally to the east form a linear building group. This group would be further extended by the erection of a house on the approved plot. Such development, in conjunction with the current proposal, would effectively infill the gap in the form of ribbon development between the settlement of Kinnaird and the building group forming Craigdally. As such, the proposal is not considered to comply with the Housing in the Countryside Policy and Guide, including Category 1. The site is only separated from the settlement of Kinnaird by the reservation of the field access on the western boundary. The purpose of LDP Policy 6 is to prevent the unplanned and ad hoc extension of settlements that have been identified and designated through the Local Development Plan process. The applicant's view that this policy is negated by the presence of the track is not accepted as reflecting the spirit or intention of the policy. Turning now to representations, there have been 4 representations, including the Inchture Area Community Council and the Braes of Carse Conservation Group. These mainly concern the proposal being contrary to Local Development Plan 2 regarding housing in the countryside. Also concern regarding the joining up of Kinnaird with Craigdally in a form of ribbon development, flood risk and adverse impact on the amenity of the area and the adjoining listed building. In this case, there is neither a request for a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison, for that presentation. Is there any questions from members to the officers on this matter? Councillor Wilson?
Thanks, Convener. Indeed, just going back to the photographs, Mr. Harrison, and I'm not sure what sequence it was in, but it was nearer the end than the beginning, where you had the pictures of Craigdally. I think the first one of the set of houses that come along was that the picture of the quarter houses for the farm.
Yes, it was. Excuse me, I beg your pardon. There is actually, I think, one house before that, but it's set to some extent behind the road frontage. So there is one more access, but yes, that's the first group. Yeah. Okay.
And this issue about ribbon development is one that interests me. Later on, the contention, I think, of the planning service is that this doesn't form part of a building group. Is that their number one point?
Yes, I think so. I mean, you can see even in the photograph we have here, it's not within a group. It's effectively part of a field.
Okay. And the consented site, which is to the east of the application site, was that given under delegated powers, or was that a application that went to committee or appeal? I know it's of some longevity, but
yes,
and is it still extant?
My understanding is it is still extant. Certainly an access into that area seems to be informed, and the applicant's agent views it as being extant. And I noticed that basically the report of handling doesn't seem to contest that in any way. So I have presumed it is extant. In terms of its history, as you say, I think it's of some long standing. And my understanding, having happened to meet the applicant on site, it was a consent which was secured on appeal to the Scottish Office, as it was at that time. This, I think, predates the local review body.
That was some time ago, if it was an appeal to the Scottish Office.
Yes, 10 years and plus ago, yeah.
Councillor James, have you any questions on this appeal?
No, I don't, thanks, Convener. I think the information that I'd been looking at, we've got quite a lot of information in our papers and what have you, and I think all the questions that I would have had have been answered, thanks.
Yes, I would agree with that. I have no questions. Members, can we proceed to determine the application for review based on the information that is before us, that is information contained within the papers and the presentation of the planning advisor? Councillor James, are you happy to proceed?
Yeah, I think we have enough information to proceed, Convener.
Councillor Wilson, are you happy to proceed?
Agreed.
Thank you. I shall lead the debate on this one myself. Been listening carefully, and I've read all the information here, and I mean, it appears to be quite clear that this would be considered as a ribbon development. I don't think that there's any dubiety in that. Yes, there has been another plot before it that has been historically given permission. It's never actually been completed as a house yet, and we'll see what happens in the future with that. But I think it's clear that the LDP that we have a policy on settlement boundaries, And this is less than a year since the current LDP2 has been come into being. And as far as I can find out, there was no application to include the area between Craigdally and Kinnaird to be included or even considered for inclusion in the LDP, which would have perhaps been the way to do this. But at the present moment, the policy is that Kinnaird has got a clear settlement boundary, and it would be really, it wouldn't be in keeping with the policy to allow development to keep coming towards Kinnaird and almost connect Kinnaird with Craigdally, as that is not what our policy was ever created to happen. Also, I'm a bit concerned that there's been a suggestion of the planning officer being biased in this matter. I mean, it's clear that the planning officer has looked at the LDP and has taken the policies from the LDP and made his decision on these policies. And I think that's quite clear when you look at the papers that this is what happened. And I really feel that that needs to be said in this forum, that there's, as far as I'm concerned, there is no suggestion of bias here. So on that, finishing on that matter, I would uphold our planning officer's decision to reject this proposal. And I'll go to Councillor James for his views on it.
Thanks, convener. And again, pretty much everything you said, I'd have to agree with. You know, planning officers are in a very difficult position. You know, if his decision had gone the other way, he'd have been the best person on the planet. You know, that I think we have a great set of planning officers, and that was a little unfair on him. I have some sympathy with the applicant here. Very, very difficult. The site is right on the edge of a boundary. Ribbon development, yes, it is ribbon development. It's everything that we put in our LDP, and for that reason, like you, convener, I would be minded to uphold the planning officer's recommendation.
Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, convener. Well, slightly, maybe controversially, I'm going to take a substantially different point of view on this one. First of all, the points made, I think there's been correspondence both from the applicant and objectors that borders on the emotional, and I don't think that helps us considering the technicalities of planning application at all. And I hope folk take note of that, and my colleagues have already referred to that, and I support their comments on that. This is a very interesting one. I know the area intimately from childhood days, and it was interesting seeing all the houses at Craigdally again, and I'm sorry about the dilapidation of one of them. However, you can see the variety of house types there are, and although they're mainly traditional type, there are some more modern examples of housing. Great discussion about the Kinnaird settlement boundary. I'm not very sure if Westmill Farm and Farmhouse should have been in the Kinnaird settlement boundary, but we are where we are, convener, before you pull me up on that, and that's just a fact of life, because Kinnaird village is quite a wee bit away. However, it's maybe useful in some ways that it is. I find it difficult because I just think that on the braes of the Carse, and we go along from Ballandine to Craigdally to Kinnaird to Rate, Kilspindie, and other villages on the braes of the Carse. There are lots of examples of new housing renovated housing, and I don't think Craigdally is any different. In essence, I personally don't think that installation, if you like, of this consented house and this house would cause great damage. It's against policy. I can't say anything else than that. But I feel that, in fact, that housing, and I think David Harrison's first photograph, which showed Craigdally from the road up the Westtown Road, it showed it in its reality, and another couple of houses here would do no real harm at all. However, I'll stop there, convener, because it's not in policy. I'm in a minority of one. I've said my piece on it. I would have been more willing to articulate more support for the proposal, but I'm not, and it's back over to you, convener.
Thank you for that, Councillor Wilson. Yes, Jeff, I think we're ready to finish up. It's a 2-1 majority to reject this appeal. I think there's one bit in it that needs to go into the reasons of refusal. I'm trying to find it, and it says building groups as the development of the site would contribute to ribbon development, which is not supported. Yes, I believe that is not in the reasons of refusal, Jeff. Yeah. Give me guidance on that.
Yes, you're quite right. There is an anomaly which has been highlighted by at least one of the respondents participating in this application. If you consider the recommended reasons for refusal set out on page 251, and the first of those two reasons, there is a reference to it contributing to ribbon development, which is not supported. But then when you turn to the decision notice itself on page 243, as issued on the 22nd of June of this year, that has not been carried forward into the reason because there's a reference here to failure to meet the definition of a rural brownfield land under Category 6. I think that's an error, and it's quite clear from the report of handling the planning officer had meant it to be the reasons set out on page 251 and not per the decision notice, which just seems to be an administrative error, which your decision this morning could then correct if you're happy to adopt the wording shown in the recommendation on 251.
I would, with the consent from Councillor James, I would adopt the the condition reasons, the refusals on 251 to be the reasons for refusal.
I would go along with that as well, convener.
In which case, there's nothing further that I would require in terms of the decision this morning and minutes, convener. Thank
you very much. Is everyone happy to carry on? Do you wish a comfort break at 10 minutes?
10 minutes, convener, perhaps, yeah.
Everybody happy with a 10-minute break, and then we'll go into the, I think it's the last two we have. Yes, the last two. Have a 10-minute break. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Jeff, you okay?
Yes, convener.
Aye. I think that's us all back and good to go. If that's the case, we shall move on to 5.1, which is erection of 3 dwelling houses at land 30 metres south of west of Leyland House, 50 metres south east of Tillyochi Farmhouse Bellado. This was a deferred matter. It's now coming back to us, and Mr. Harrison, I'll let you do the presentation on this.
Thank you, convener. This is a detailed planning application for the erection of 3 dwelling houses at land southwest of Leyland House and 50 metres southeast of Tillyochi Farmhouse Bellado. The application site is in 2 parts, one comprising plots 1 and 2, and another comprising plot 3. The public road passes between these areas. There are also a variety of houses and farm buildings in this location, which lies within the countryside. This proposal follows up an earlier planning permissions for basically the same development. You might like to have the be taken through the photographs now. The sequence of the photographs are views from the adjoining public roads, the context for plot 3, and then moving on to the context for the combined plots 1 and 2. So here we have the first photographs, begging pardon, which are plots 2 and 3. This is the joint plots, as it were, and we're looking from the A91 looking south. So this is us looking across the intervening sort of farmland just slightly to the east of Carnbo. And this, you can see Leyland House itself, which is the, shall we say, the substantial traditional white faced house there. And then to the left of that, as we look at the photograph, we're looking at the farm steading buildings and the land, the yard behind the steading buildings. We can't actually really see Tillyochi House in this particular photograph, but it gives you a context of the broader landscape there, which is part of course, the Loch Leven Basin, as it were. So we move from that position right to the approach to plot number 1. Say this is us approaching Tillyochi from the eastern side. That's the Loch Leven side. As you can see, the general nature of the farmland there is open and flat, and then within that we have this group of buildings which also has a certain amount of woodland in properties beyond. So from that general position in the landscape, we move up the road, as it were. This is us next to plot 1, looking at plot 1. You're seeing Tillyochi farmhouse, or shall we say the rear extension to it, on the right-hand side of the photograph there, and Tillyochi cottage beyond that. Then plot 1 indicated generally in red there, and the various plans show the position of a drainage treatment facility within the field to the east of Tillyochi there, and that's basically in that particular corner. So from that position, we move slightly further up the road. In the next photograph, we're looking across the, as it were, the intervening open sort of paddock or field between the agricultural, so obviously the cultivated field and Tillyochi itself, and then plot number 1. And then again, the next photograph moving a little bit further up the road again. We turn round and we see Tillyochi farmhouse itself and the extension of the back of it I mentioned earlier, plot 1, and then you're just beginning to pick up some of the other properties on the far side of the road from Tillyochi farmhouse on the extreme right-hand side of that photograph too. So if we swing round to the right then, in the next photograph, we get those steading buildings, farm buildings on the opposite side of the road from Tillyochi farmhouse. And then if we swing round again to the right of that photograph, we're still just catching a little bit of the corner of the steading buildings, and then a yard at the back containing some caravans and, as I say, a general sort of working area associated with the farmsteading buildings. Swinging in the opposite direction then round to the left, we see a different use of one of the modern farm buildings. It's actually in relation to a Christmas tree company. And then swinging round to the right of that, we see the intervening ground between plot number 1 and the more open landscape there, looking towards the Lomond Hills, as it were, in the far distance. And swinging round to the right of that photograph again, we're now looking at the access into plot 1. You'll see there's an existing access serving Tiliochi farmhouse there, but there's basically an intention to use the existing field access, as it were, as a means of going around the back of the house to serve plot number 1. So from there, if we move to the next photograph, we're moving up, as it were, the side of the farmhouse. You can see the access there, partly through the adjoining open field area. Looks like it's been used for rough grazing at the moment. And then beyond that, of course, we've got the wider landscape and the arable land. So from that position, that's the access into plot 1. If we go to the next photograph, swings round to the right, we see the full extent of plot 1, which appears to be laid out partly as garden ground at the moment. And then that's, as I say, looking in a southerly direction. And then if we swing round to the right of that photograph again, we're looking down the back, as it were, of Tiliochi farmhouse. You can see on the extreme right-hand side of the photograph towards Tiliochi bungalow, which is beyond. We're still catching the corner of plot number 1. From that position, if we then move on altogether, we step back, as it were, into the public road. And here we have Tiliochi farmhouse identified, the steading buildings identified, and the more recently completed garage building associated with Tiliochi farmhouse in the immediate foreground there. So from that public road frontage position, because of course, let's say the public road goes through the application site, or the application site crosses the public road, we swing round to the left of that, we see the main block of steading buildings. The reason the red line is there is because access to the other 2 plots will be taken across this open yard area, which lies adjacent to the public road. So in the next photograph, we move round to the left again, still catching the corner of the steading buildings, but you can see this is also at the moment a means of access to Leland House itself. And then again, if we swing round to the left of that photograph, we're now looking into the field area within which plots 2 and 3 are located. So if we go back for a moment, swinging to the right of that, we're back into, shall we say, the yard area and identifying the access to plots 2 and 3. And then if we move up from that, in the next photograph, we look up the means of access, or the line of the access proposed through that side of the field, as it were, to those 2 plots. And from there, in the next photograph, we swing to the left, we see the remainder of the field between the plots and the public road. From that position in the next photograph, we're sort of moving on, as it were. We're now standing in the access route to the 2 plots. And then again, if we move to the next, we move further up that access road, and we're now looking into, as it were, the body of plots 2 and 3, looking in a northerly direction towards the A91, which is where the first photograph was taken. And you can probably just about make out the A91, which has got 1 or 2 white dots on it. So from that position, if we swing towards the left, we look across the plots, the main part of the plots, and also we're beginning to pick up the ruin, which is referred to in the papers, and a little bit of the woodland beyond, which is also referred to in the papers. But as you can see, there's a sort of this is on slightly rising ground here, and beyond the red line, the ground starts to fall away back down to the Quakeburn. If we swing round to the left in the next photograph, again, we're still catching the ruin and part of the plot, and also the adjoining open area of the field and the cottage or property, which is on the public roadside. We swing round again in the next photograph towards the left. Again, we look across that intervening field and picking up some of the properties on the opposite side of the public road. This time swinging round to the right in the next photograph, it takes us to give us a little bit more detail of the ruin that's referred to in the papers within plots 2 and 3. And then moving on to the next photograph, we go up the site to that western boundary. This is to show you the tree planting in the adjoining property on that western boundary. So from that slightly more elevated position, swinging down to the right of that, we look across plots 2 and 3, as it were, and obviously we have Leyland House, slightly lower position than the application site itself, which is slightly on the, shall we say, the rising ground, at the top of the rising ground between the public road and Leyland House. And then if we swing round to the right in the next photograph, we look down the remainder of the field back towards the group of buildings forming Tiliochi Farmhouse and the steading and the like. And then if we swing round to the right of that photograph again, I'll leave you with at least the first plot, as it were. We may have to go back to look at the other plots separately. Turning first in relation to the applicant's case, in summary, planning permission for this proposal was first granted in 2011 and renewed in 2016. This is seen as material planning consideration to the appeal. The proposal was accepted as meeting the Council's rural housing policy previously. Additional landscaping was seen as crucial to contain the plots and limit further expansion opportunities. A Section 75 agreement was also concluded regarding an education contribution and to ensure that drainage provision took account of the need to mitigate phosphorus emissions within the Loch Leven catchment area. This proposal is seen as having been implemented by a sewage treatment plant having been installed as per the approved drawings. A car licence has also been issued by SEPA. As such, it's considered that there is no necessity for this planning application or the appeal. This appeal is submitted to protect the applicant's position. Although Local Development Plan 2 has now been adopted, the planning policies, guidance and siting criteria concerning housing in the countryside is fundamentally unchanged since 2011. The most recent refusal seems to be based on a different interpretation of these policies and guidance by a different planning officer. Plots 1 and 2 have robust defined boundaries. To the east, that's Leyland House and Garden, and to the west, mature woodland. While the boundaries to the north and the south are open, they are seen as well established by post and wire fences and reflect the building line of the adjacent properties. It's considered that they would appear as being part of the larger building group when seen from the A91 to the north, or when viewed against woodland when viewed from the east. As such, they are seen as having no adverse impact on the wider landscape. Regarding the individual plot, it's seen as having well-defined boundaries to the north, that's Tiliochi Farmhouse, and to the west, Tiliochi Bungalow. There is characteristic fencing to the south and east. It is noted that the concerns expressed in relation to landscape impact have not been applied to this plot. Regarding the third reason for refusal, the drainage considerations have previously been dealt with through a legal agreement and, subsequently, a planning condition and SEPA's approval of a car licence. It is noted that SEPA were not consulted and no request for drainage information was made to the applicant, who could have provided more on this aspect prior to the decision. The LRB are invited to undertake a formal consultation with SEPA. There are no technical concerns regarding flooding, access, design or plot sizes. It is accepted that the existing ruin is not worthy of retention or restoration. The two plots are seen as more appropriate in terms of their form and layout of the development. In conclusion, the proposed plots are considered to comply with Category 1 building groups and Category 5 conversion or replacement of redundant non-domestic buildings of Policy 19 in regarding the pair of plots. Regarding the individual plot, it's considered to comply with Category 1 building groups of Policy 19. It is also considered to comply with Policy 39, all landscapes, and Policy 46, Loch Leven catchment area. Turning now in summary to the Officer's Report of Handling, planning approval for the 3 houses was granted in 2010, then renewed in 2016. This application was not implemented, therefore there is no current planning permission for this development. In noting this planning history, the officer has difficulty in seeing how the proposal would have complied with the Housing in the Country policy at that time. While acknowledging the planning history, the current application falls to be assessed against the current planning policy and guidance, specifically relevant categories of Policy 19 and the supplementary guidance concerning housing in the countryside. Regarding the 2 plots, the buildings adjacent to the site are viewed as meeting the definition of a building group under Policy 19. However, to be acceptable, proposals have to comply with the associated siting criteria. In this case, the part of the field forming the plots only has definable boundaries on the east and west. The longer boundaries to the north and south do not have definable boundaries. The northern boundary only has a post and wire fence, and the southern boundary has nothing. Consequently, the proposal is not considered to have a sufficient enclosure to form a definable site as an extension to a building group. The site is seen as being highly visible to the surrounding landscape, and the development is viewed as being intrusive within the countryside, especially from the A91, which lies to the north. The site contains a small ruinous stone building that has no roof and is no longer in use. The proposal on this site is for 2 5-bedroom detached houses with large detached garages. The footprints of the new buildings would be well in excess of the ruin to the extent that the proposal is unable to comply with the provisions that allow for the conversion or replacement of non-domestic buildings under Category 5 of Policy 19 and the related guidance. Regarding the individual plot, the adjacent properties are viewed as meeting the definition of a building group under Policy 19. However, this site is also assessed as failing to comply with the associated siting criteria as an acceptable extension of the building group. This is because its eastern and southern boundaries are only enclosed by fencing, and the land is not therefore seen as forming a definable site within the landscape. Regarding drainage, it is noted that the sites lie within the Loch Leven catchment area. No evidence of the required phosphorus mitigation measures have been submitted with the application, therefore SEPA has not been consulted. Access and flooding matters are seen as being capable of being controlled through conditions if planning permission was being granted. It is noted that a contribution to primary education would be required if permission was being granted. In this case, turning to representations, Kinross Shire Civic Trust made a representation objecting to the proposed development, mainly concerning lack of information in relation to drainage, proposal being contrary to the Housing in the Countryside policy, and housing being out of character with the surrounding environment. In this case, you'll be aware that the application was being continued, so of course there is a section on further information, and I'll maybe just take you through some comments on that additional information, but you might like to have pages 351, 381, 498 and 501 either marked or to hand in some way, because I'll be referring to them. This is in relation to the further information only. This application has been before the LRB for a first consideration at its meeting in September 2020, at which time the case was continued to seek to secure greater clarity regarding the status of the original and renewed planning application, and to consult SEPA in relation to the requirements for phosphorus mitigation within the Lochleven catchment area. The responses from Development Management, SEPA and the applicant are contained in pages 489 onwards. Members will understand that whether or not the previous planning permission has been implemented is a material consideration in assessing the current review. The further information would seem to raise a number of associated background matters that for members to be aware of. Turning first of all to the reference to the Certificate of Lawful Use or Development, it is noticed that Development Management consider that determining whether or not the development has been implemented ought to be determined through a Certificate of Lawful Use and Development. It is suggested that the LRB request such an application. In contrast, the applicant considers that requesting such a certificate is beyond the remit of the local review body. It is noted that the local review body cannot oblige the submission of a certificate, and the applicant is not offered to undergo that process. Turning now to the drainage installation, the applicant has submitted a drainage plan and photographs relating to Tillyocky Farmhouse in support of his view that the previously approved development has commenced. And these are on pages 498 and 501 respectively. However, members do not have any comments from the Development Management on this submission, which was received after Development Management provided their comments. It would be open to members to decide whether or not they wish to have any comments from Development Management on this aspect. It's also noted that site plans submitted with the previous applications show a variety of different drainage arrangements, which also result in differences in the extent and configuration of the application site. The drainage arrangement submitted recently, that's page 498, is absent from the original and renewal applications. Those application sites show a different arrangement for connecting from the rear rather than the front of the farmhouse into a new facility provided within the individual plot to the rear. The drainage arrangement, that's page 498, is shown on the current case site plan, that's page 352. However, it is noted that this is out with the current application site. It is also noted that the plan associated with the recent car licence, that's page 381, shows the previous drainage arrangement serving the individual plot and within the individual plot, rather than the drainage arrangement shown in the recently submitted plan and photographs. It is recognised that this may be of limited importance to SEPA, who are of course concerned with achieving the phosphorus mitigation as such. The photographs submitted, that's page 501, do not indicate the dates on which the photographs were taken. Taken together, there would appear to be some doubt that the further information submitted to date demonstrates conclusively that the original planning permission has been implemented timeously. It would appear that the works undertaken were not part of the original or renewal submissions and have been largely out with each of the application sites. Such works might therefore be seen as being undertaken separately from the implementation of the planning approval. The conditions of the original planning permission indicate that no development on the proposal being approved is to be progressed until after the phosphorus mitigation works have been undertaken, namely such works may be viewed as being a prerequisite undertaken prior to the commencement of the approved development, rather than part of the approved development. It is suggested that members may wish to consider whether or not they may wish further guidance on this matter prior to determining the review. In this case, there is a request for a site visit. There is no request for a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison, for that very concise and detailed. I'm getting an echo from somewhere. Concise and detailed presentation. Has any of the members got any questions on that at the moment? Councillor Wilson?
Well, Convener, thank you for the comprehensive report. Absolutely. I don't know if it's a comment or a question, but where do we go from here? I think this is quite complicated, and we should consider how best we proceed and whether we need further information. But we'll come to that in the discussion stage, Convener. But I don't know. I mean, Mr. Harrison, the options for us are to, I think, to seek further information, guidance, or technical advice, was a very technical subject, or presumably proceed to take a decision today. If I've missed out on any of the options, then please give me guidance, or please give us guidance.
I think you're muted, David.
Sorry, my apologies. I find it difficult to give you, shall we say, what you might say, absolute guidance at this stage solely on the information we have. I fully appreciate the applicants stressing of the importance of recognising whether or not the original consent has and the renewed consent as well have been implemented, and it clearly has a direct bearing on your determination of the review. And it's really in that circumstance, having received the papers, there may be benefit in trying to get at least a greater degree of clarity from the applicant and to some extent from the planning officers as to their view on whether or not it has been implemented. Had we received or it had gone through the process of the certificate that I was mentioning, that is an understandable way of trying to determine these things when issues like this crop up from time to time. They're not common, but they do come up from time to time, and there is a process for doing that. But in the absence of having gone through that process, you as a body, you would seem to be faced with having to make the best of the information which you have before you, or the choice, as you say, the other option is to try and get a greater level of clarity on that information, and to some extent possibly to invite comment from, as I say, both the applicant or their agent and development management as to how they see the whole breadth of circumstances which have unfolded here through a combination of applications being made, additional submissions being made, and assertions being made on the basis of that information. But at least to the extent that I've mentioned, there appear to be other matters which may be able to be brought forward to provide you with at least a greater degree of clarity on that really critical issue.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Councillor James if there's any other questions. We know the situation we're in, and I believe Jeff wants to comment on that, but just in case Councillor James has a question on perhaps another matter that we've missed, I'll give Councillor James opportunity if he wants to ask any questions.
Convener, I don't have any questions, but I'd be interested to see or to listen to Mr. Fogg's advice. Thank you.
Yes, yes. I too, we deferred this, and rather than it being more simplified, it seems to have got more complex. and I think the advice from legal would be of great benefit of us now. So Jeff, if you can come in, please, and we'll hear what your take on it is.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. To pick up on what Mr. Harrison has said this morning or afternoon, I would appreciate the opportunity of further information being sought, at least from the applicant and planning officer, in the hope that I and David would be better able to advise you thereafter on the status of the previous application, because I do think it's potentially highly significant knowing what status it has, whether it's a lapsed consent or an extant consent. And as things stand this morning, there's at least some dubiety, and I think we should at least explore whether or not deferring for additional information will bring further clarity to the matter. And given its crucial importance as a determining issue to the matters before you, I would therefore encourage you to allow us to do just that.
Yes, thank you for that advice, and I'm going to move on, and what I'm going to say this time is a bit off script. Members, in my view, we cannot proceed to determine this, and I would request a deferment for additional time for information on the status of the former consent and particular drainage works to date. Is everyone happy to agree with that?
I'd certainly agree with it, Convener, thanks.
Agreed.
Right. Thanks. That means we have a deferment on that. I know that it's going to mean that this is going to be sitting for a while before a decision, and it's the way it is. We cannot help that, so we will now proceed to the other one, which was a deferment, 5.2, which is erection of a dwelling house, land 40 metres northwest of Carrickmore, Sochi Road, Crieff. Mr. Harrison, will you give the presentation on this one?
Thank you, Convener. As you say, it's a detailed planning application for the erection of a dwelling house at land 40 metres. Sorry, I'm getting rid of the cat. For 40 metres northwest of Carrickmore, Sochi Road, Crieff. The proposal is for a 3-storey building of contemporary design on a steeply sloping wooded embankment which drops down to the adjoining school playing fields to the west. Externally, it would have areas of glazing, white rendered walls, and a slate effect concrete tile roof. A decking area would project along the rear elevation, and off-street parking, hard standing, is also envisaged. The accommodation would provide for 3 bedrooms. You might like to have page 589, which provides you with the plans of the site and also plans of the proposed house. And I'll just take you through the photographs now. The general sequence of the photographs is approaching the site from the south. The existing houses and the site frontage is onto Sochi Road, and the site and the wooded embankment as seen from the adjoining playing field level. So I say this first photograph is us approaching the site, going in a northerly direction along Sochi Road, to give you a feel for some of the existing trees, and the blue line shows you, shall we say, the additional land in the applicant's ownership, which is part of that embankment. So if we go from that photograph to the next one, up the road, as it were, come round the corner a little bit, and as again you can see the woodland and the applicant's ownership, and the red line showing the frontage of the application site onto Sochi Road. From there, if we move to the next photograph, we swing slightly to the right, and that shows the houses on the opposite side of the application site and the land on the embankment. So as you can see, there's a mixture of designs here, mixture of materials being used. Generally speaking, they're modern properties or relatively modern properties, and they're set back from Sochi Road itself. So that's the housing line to the east. If we swing round to the right of that photograph, in the next photograph, we get the frontage of the application site. And as you'll see, not just the woodland on that embankment adjacent to the road, you can get the impression that the road is sloping down as we go down Sochi Road in that northerly direction. So if we go further down the road from there, we see the house immediately adjoining the application site. So we're just catching the corner of the application site, as you can see there. So this, again, we're still looking in a northerly direction. So we have this modern bungalow and an outbuilding as well adjoining the application site. And you'll see the rear of that building once we drop down to the playing fields at the lower level. So if we move from there down the road in the next photograph and look back, as it were, up the slope along the frontage of the application site, and you can see the relationship between that and the adjoining garage building. So from there, if we step back altogether, we go past the adjoining bungalow, as it were, and you can just catch the corner of the application site, I say, where it fronts onto the Sochi Road itself. So from there, if we move to the next photograph, we move completely now down onto the lower level. This is us looking south across the playing fields, and you can probably see, in addition to the red line identifying the application site, you can just make out the house I referred to earlier, which abuts the application site on that higher level, to give you some indication of the difference in levels between the Sochi Road and the playing fields. And of course, you can see the blue line give you an indication of the other ground on the embankment, which is in the applicant's ownership. So from that same position, if we move towards the right, in the next photograph, we see the body of the playing fields itself and the context, as it were, of the application site. And I say we're just still catching the corner, the blue line giving some indication of the far part of the embankment and the applicant's ownership. Moving to the next photograph and towards the left, we move obviously closer to the application site here, and this shows a vehicle parked within the grounds of the adjoining bungalow. So that's to say a parking area, which is effectively obscuring the garage beyond, but it's hopefully this gives you an indication of the difference in levels between the playing field level and the Sochi Road level. As we swing towards the right in the next photograph, we look back, as it were, lower position towards the adjoining house. You can see clearly the bungalow and the associated parking there and the embankment between the two. And from that position, if we swing around to the right in the next photograph and step back a little, we see the application site as it is at the moment. From there, we move, as it were, further into the application site directly. There's reference to the drainage facility, and this is to give you some indication of that. This is sort of a manhole cover within the application site. It's immediately adjacent to the corner of the proposed building, if you're looking at the plan. And if we swing round to the left of that photograph, and we've also stepped down a little bit, we still catch the drainage manhole, which is referred to in the papers, but also we pick up the mill lade, which is obviously not carrying much in the way of water at the moment, but does from time to time come into use. So you can see the extent of the woodland and the slope within the application site in that photograph. And if we go to the next photograph, we swing slightly towards the right, you're still catching the corner of the manhole cover and facility, and that shows you some of the woodland and trees within the proposed house position. So if we move to the next photograph, I'll leave you with that general photograph showing you the position of the application site, the other embankment in the woodland, and also it catches the adjoining property. Turning first of all in summary to the applicant's case, regarding the first reason for refusal, the applicant considers the proposal complies with Local Development Plan Policy 14, Open Space Retention and Provision for existing areas, as the proposed residential development only, and I quote, involves a minor part of the site which would not affect its use as a recreational or amenity resource, end of quotation. Only a very small proportion of the local open space provision would be developed, and only 4 trees would require to be removed. The land is seen as being of no recreational value and very limited amenity value. Illustrative material has been submitted with the notice of review, which is seen as showing the limited extent to which the proposal would impact on the open space areas of the sports pitches and the housing to the west. The siting of the proposed house is considered to be sensitive. A tree and ecology report concludes that the site is of limited amenity and nature conservation merit. Regarding the second and third reasons for refusal, it's considered that the proposal complies with Local Development Plan 2 Policy 1A, placemaking by, firstly, continuing the domestic linear street pattern of Socky Road, secondly, respecting the site topography using a split level design stepping down the slope and retaining all mature trees. The proposal does not block the outlook from existing houses. Thirdly, adopting a similar footprint to existing houses, presenting a single story to the street frontage, and using a white render and slate effect concrete tile roof. Fourthly, improving pedestrian safety by extending the footpath by some 20 metres. And finally, meeting and exceeding building control regulations with regard to energy performance and carbon emissions. The illustrative material is seen as supporting these assertions. Regarding the fourth reason for refusal, a tree survey, which was not requested during the processing of the planning application, has been submitted with the notice of review. It is confirmed that the applicant is willing to adopt all of the recommendations of this report for the removal and protection of trees during the prospective building operations. Regarding the fifth reason for refusal, there was no request for information concerning protected species during the processing of the application. This information has been submitted with the notice of review. From this initial survey, it is not expected that there would be an impact on protected species. Regarding the sixth reason for refusal, a revised layout plan has been submitted with the notice of review, which amends the parking arrangement and provides for visibility displays of around 90 metres north and 80 metres south. It is considered that there is a lack of adequate guidance as to the council standards regarding visibility displays and the requirement to enter and leave the carriageway in a forward gear. It is noted that other residents in Socky Road do not have turning facilities and are generally reverse into driveways. This same dispensation is requested. It is noted that the planning officer who was appointed to the case was off ill during the initial period. It is considered that this led to the officer not requesting additional information to be submitted. It's the applicant's view that the reasons for refusal are unfounded and the application should be approved with appropriate conditions. Turning now to the officer's report of handling in summary. The site is located within an area zoned as open space covered by Policy 14, Open Space and Retention and Provision of the Local Development Plan 2. This policy seeks to protect areas of public and private open space where development is not permitted except in specific limited circumstances. Of these, only the following circumstances need to be assessed, as the other criteria relate to land use for recreational purposes. That is, a potential exception states, and I quote, "The proposed development involves a minor part of the site which would not affect its continued use as a recreational or amenity resource." This proposal would involve a minor part of the total area of open space, which is mainly playing fields. it would not affect its continued use as a recreational space. However, the amenity value of the area would be compromised by the proposed dwelling. The site forms part of the wooded slope that creates a clear landscape boundary between the recreational area and the residential development beyond. The proposed dwelling would have a detrimental impact on that transition between playing fields, the built-up area, and as such would have a detrimental impact on the landscape character of the surrounding natural environment and the setting of the playing fields. Regarding matters of design, density and siting, the development is not considered to respect or to have a positive contribution to the character and amenity of the place, and is assessed as being contrary to policy 1A placemaking. The existing houses on this side of Socky Road are sited at the top of, rather than stepped down, the slope. They are generally well screened by trees and vegetation. By comparison, the siting and design of the proposed dwelling is expected to be visually intrusive and is assessed as failing to meet parts A, B, C, D and G of the criteria set out in policy 1B placemaking. Regarding policy 40B, this requires that tree surveys should accompany all applications for planning permission where there are existing trees on site. No site survey, including the root protection areas, has been provided, so it has not been possible to assess the potential developable area of the site. Regarding policy 41, it states that planning permission will not be granted for development that would be likely to have an adverse effect on protected species. No information has been provided, so it has not been possible to assess this aspect of the application. Regarding policy 52, this states that there will be a general presumption against proposals for built development or land raising on a functional floodplain and in areas where there is a medium to high risk of flooding from any source, or where the proposal would increase the probability of flooding elsewhere. Insufficient information has been provided to assess the difference in level from the turret burn to the proposed dwelling. Therefore, it has not been possible to complete a full assessment of the risk assessment from flooding. Therefore, the proposal does not comply with policy 52. The proposed plan does not allow for vehicles to turn and access the carriageway in a forward gear. The location of the proposed parking area immediately adjacent to the existing neighbouring fence would restrict forward visibility. Forward visibility should be provided for 43 metres in both directions from a point 2.4 metres back from the kerb. The proposed house design, in terms of its 3-storey height and proposed white render finish, is not considered to be in keeping with the surrounding built development. These elements are viewed as amplifying the visual impact of the building to the detriment of the existing landscape. In addition, the proposal is not viewed as providing sufficient private amenity space for a substantial 3-bedroom dwelling. Turning finally to representations, 2 representations have been received concerning, firstly, the severe wastewater flood risk linked directly to the sewage system, which causes frequent flooding to neighbouring houses. No further outflow should be allowed to enter the sewage system until this problem is resolved. Secondly, visibility for drivers is severely restricted on this section of Socky Road. And thirdly, development would overlook Morrison's playing fields. In this case, as mentioned already, there is further information. This case was given first consideration by the LRB at its meeting in June 2020. At that time, a significant number of matters were referred back to the applicant and development management for clarification, comment and further information. These are now the subject of pages running from page 615 onwards, and these are fairly detailed. In this case, there is neither a request for a site visit nor a hearing. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harrison, for that excellent presentation. It's greatly appreciated. Is there any questions from members to Officers on this proposal? Councillor James?
No, nothing for me. Thanks, convener. I thought that was comprehensive enough, and the information we've got in front of us as well anyway.
Councillor Wilson?
Thanks. Just one quick question, Mr. Harrison. Given the additional information we've got and the tree report from the applicant's agent, looking at the picture we've got before us, what would be, you can't be exact about this, but potentially the amount of tree removal given the if the consent was granted?
The applicant has indicated he thinks that approximately 4 trees would be removed in order to accommodate the proposal. However, I note if you look at page 623, which is part of the further information,
yeah,
you get a response, as it were, in relation to, shall we say, an assessment of that in really quite detail. So we seem to have a different view in terms of the potential impact, if that's really what you're trying to assess. The applicant obviously feels the house can be accommodated, and shall we say, effectively all but a small number of trees retained. That doesn't sit comfortably with the views you see on page 623, and I note there's concern that, for example, the actual development process might interrupt or be in conflict with the root protection areas, as a note I see here. So there does seem to be a difference in view. The applicant thinks he can do it with very limited impact. The officer's consultation response would suggest that he doesn't share that level of confidence.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Wilson?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Members, can we proceed to determine the application review based on the information before us and the presentation by the planning advisor?
Agreed.
Somehow I've lost it. Hold on till I get everybody back. And Councillor Wilson, are you happy to proceed?
Yes, convener. I think particularly the additional information we've got both from the applicant and the planning service has been helpful.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, will you lead the debate on this one?
Okay, thank you. Again, all of these things are a matter of balance, convener, as you know, and this one we've certainly given it a good hearing. This is the second time that I think you and I at least have considered the application, and we asked for additional information. As I said earlier, that's particularly helpful, and we've got quite firm replies, both from the planning service and from the applicant to our questions, which is helpful. My concern is two or threefold. First of all, there's the amount of tree removal, and although the applicant has said only 4 trees would be removed, there's evidence of ash dieback at least in one of the trees, convener. Whether to what extent that is there, and it's referred to in the report, I think. But I think, unlike the house on the left that we can see in the picture, which you see a bit of through the trees, I think this house would be given the potential amount of tree removal, and there's a difference of opinion about that, and I'm kind of taking a middle course on that, would be quite significant in relation to exposure of the building, because the building would be much more prominent on the site. I think there is a potential of a precedent, although we can only look at each application as it stands, and I think there is an erosion of that landscape setting, whereas the other houses are hidden in the landscape very much, and you only see a bit of them. This house would be unduly prominent, and given these points, I am content to support the reasons for refusal given by the planning service, and that's contained on pages 579 and 580. I don't think at this stage I've got an awful lot to add, but if there are any particular points of detail, I've no doubt Mr Harrison and Mr Fogg will keep us right, Convener. So I would be for refusing the review.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor James, you wish to add to the debate?
Thank you very much, Convener. I know this area extremely well. I used to live in Turret Bank Road 3 or 4 years ago and used to drive this route on a daily basis. I think what they're proposing to put on this site is totally out of character, in completely the wrong place, and for all the reasons that the planning officer has mentioned in his reasons for refusal, I would certainly uphold that decision. Thank
you, Councillor James. Yes, I would concur with both my colleagues. At the present, we're looking at a line of trees, and we know that there's 4 going to come out of it. Once that 4 comes out and a house built, the house would be detrimental to the existing landscape. I am quite confident that it would be quite well seen from people using the park, so therefore that's the first reason. Also, it must be taken on board that as well as removal of the trees on this steep slope, I have very much concerned, and I'm not confident that protecting the trees that would be left would be possible. And I know that the applicant will probably feel aggrieved that we're going on about the turning vehicles or exiting and entering in forward gear. This is a policy that was never retrospectively enforced. Therefore, it's not uncommon for a lot of houses or dwellings not to have this facility. However, we have to move forward and we have to look at road safety. And therefore, that policy to me is very important. And if you're wanting to build a house near to a main through road, then I'm afraid if you're not able to accommodate that, I would think it wouldn't be acceptable. And clearly, the transport assessment agrees with me on that. With these things, and obviously there is actually 6 reasons for refusal here, I'm happy to uphold the officer's decision to refuse. Thank you, and I'll ask Jeff if there's any revisions required to the reason for refusal.
And if you could just bear with me, Convener, I don't think so. Just allow me just to check.
Maybe while Mr. Fogg is checking there, I might point out something that there's sort of one possible, and I stress possible, additional reason for refusal. There's reference in the report of handling to policy 40A, and this is to do with protection of existing woodland. And I've noted the comments you've made about that, particularly Councillor Wilson's comments. So there may be, if that is an area of concern that you have, a reason for making reference to the proposal, in your opinion, not complying with policy 40A, which has a number of sub-elements to it, and it would appear that parts A, D and E would be the relevant parts, considering the comments that you've made.
Yes, appreciate that, and quite happy to have that included if my other colleagues are happy with that.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Looking again, I wonder if rather than having that added, if the reason that Mr. Harrison has just identified would be more appropriate in substitution of the 4th reason, because the decision notice was issued in January of this year, and that was before I think the additional tree survey information was submitted. And you might feel that that now displaces the fourth reason for refusal, which states that no information is provided to assess the existing trees on site or to demonstrate the development could be accommodated whilst maintaining root protections, etc. So I do wonder if, in fact, the policy 40A is more appropriate than the original 40B of the decision notice.
Right, thank you for that advice, Mr. Fogg. I can see why they would. Yes, that would be quite a decent idea. What's my two colleagues feel about that?
I would certainly agree to that, convener.
Good point.
In a similar vein, if you look at reason number 5 at the moment, again, that's saying that there's no information to assess the impact on protected species. That may have moved on as a result of the additional information being submitted. If you were minded to still be concerned in that area, you might want to change the word no to insufficient.
Yeah, fair point.
With those two alterations, convener, there was nothing further I want to say in respect of your decision this afternoon and the appropriateness of the decision notice. Thank you.
Thank you. If everyone's happy with that, that was the final item of business today. Thank you all very much for attending, and I thank the support of Mr. Fogg and Mr. Harrison, and I'll see you. I think it'll be after Christmas now, is it? Yeah, it'll be January. So, as best as we can during COVID-19, have a good Christmas to you all and a Happy New Year. And here's hoping 2021 comes with better news.